Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of the But First She Failed podcast. Over the last few weeks, we've been going into this topic of perfectionism, how it's actually a form of self-sabotage, the difference between a high achiever and a perfectionist, as well as the root causes of perfectionism, what happened in our childhood, what led to this. But what I thought was really interesting, obviously, because this podcast is about business development, career growth, all those things, I thought it would be interesting to take a specific look at how it affects us when it comes to our careers, when it comes to our businesses, when it comes to our professional lives and professional development, and the hidden dangers that are found in perfectionism when it comes to all three of these areas. So without further ado, here are the hidden dangers of perfectionism when it comes to our career, our businesses, our professional life and development, this and so much more. So before we get into the hidden dangers, I thought that it would be good to go over what are the good things about it, right? If you are anything like me, perfectionism or being a perfectionist doesn't actually sound like a bad thing. It actually sounds like a great thing. I used to think it was an awesome thing, right? Because I used to think perfectionists are actually people that achieve high things. It's great to be a perfectionist. That's the only way you get excellence. But I didn't realize until I started doing this whole series that I struggled with it deeply, as well as that it's actually not a really healthy thing, right? And we went over why it's not healthy and the root causes of actually being a high achiever is the healthy version of being a perfectionist, right? So if you're a high achiever, it comes from a really healthy place internally. Your approach, your mindset, everything is healthy about it, right? So you can be a high achiever and want to have these big audacious goals or ambitious goals, but it comes from a healthy place. When you're a perfectionist, it actually doesn't come from a healthy place. It comes from a really unhealthy place of fear of failing or low self-esteem or needing to validation from others. There's a lot of different ways that it can be unhealthy, right? And it's a very win or lose mentality. It's very cutthroat and it actually can lead to burnout and so much more. It's actually a dangerous thing, right? But let's get into the good qualities as far as what are the good things that we can extract from being a perfectionist when it comes to our careers, right? So one of the things is high standards and quality, right? So perfectionists often set high standards for themselves and their work. It can result in consistently high work output, which can be, this can be an asset in industries that are attention to details matters, right? So high standards and qualities, that's actually a good thing that can come from being a perfectionist. So not all is lost if we're a perfectionist, right? So another good thing that can come from being a perfectionist is motivation to improve, because perfectionists constantly strive to improve and may push themselves to learn more, develop new skills, and elevate their performance. That can be a good thing, right? Another good thing that can come from it is strong reputation and excellence. People might see you as a highly reliable and thorough professional who always delivers exceptional results, potentially opening up opportunities for career advancement and business growth, right? So this is actually, those are the good things that can come from it. And if you remember, like I just said, we have the episode 2 weeks ago, we did a high achiever versus a perfectionist. If you haven't seen that, I recommend that you stop this video and actually go back and listen to that so you can kind of see the difference between, or maybe watch it after, but I just think it's so crucial to know the difference between why it's healthy to be a high achiever versus a perfectionist and how you can get into this category of being a high achiever versus this category, because believe me, it can lead to burnout and so much more. And it's really not a healthy thing to be a perfectionist, right? So these are just the good looking traits that can come up from being a perfectionist, right? But now let's get into the ugly, right? We talked about how it can lead to burnout or worse, and we'll go into that in a little bit more. But perfectionism can show up in our careers, our businesses, and professional lives in so many ways, negative ways as well, right? So one of the negative ways that it shows up is through procrastination. We talked about this a little bit, actually in 2 episodes, 3 episodes ago, the first episode on this topic in this mini series, we talked about procrastination. I was shocked to find out that procrastination is actually a sign of perfectionism. Never would have imagined that. I thought a perfectionist could never be a procrastinator, right? Because they are so good with their time management. But I stand corrected. I realized that I actually struggle with that. That's part of my perfectionism, is actually coming out in my procrastination, right? So, perfectionists can often delay tasks because they fear work won't meet their high standards. This can lead to procrastination, missed deadlines, and feeling overwhelmed. So how does this look like in a career, business, or professional settings? Well, maybe you miss deadlines with your boss or your team constantly, right? Or maybe, when it comes to a client, like you said that you would deliver something by a certain date to a client and you didn't, and you have excuses and you don't meet deadlines. Why? Because you are procrastinator, because you want what you're delivering to be so perfect that you take either too much time doing it or you take too much time getting to do it, right? So you don't even start the thing until the very end and then you miss a deadline, right? This can also show up as maybe you miss deadlines, right? So the deadline came, passed, and you still haven't submitted something, right? Or maybe you crammed it, you made it to the deadline, you handed in the thing, you turned in the product or to the client or to your team member or to your boss, but maybe it wasn't your best work because you did it all within one day and you had weeks and weeks to do it, or you had a whole month to do it, or you could have done parts of it and analyzed it and done it better. But because you crammed it in, it's not representation of your best work. You could have actually done better work if you wouldn't have been a perfectionist and stopped yourself from starting when you wanted to start and procrastinated because of the overwhelm of how perfect you wanted this thing to be. How perfect you wanted step 1 and step 2 to be, instead of actually getting to the work, right? So this can really affect you with analysis paralysis and with a cramming. It can lead to missed opportunities. Sometimes people don't even make it to the deadlines, like I mentioned. So this could come out in a lot of missed opportunities. It can be a bad look when you constantly miss deadlines with your boss or your employer. That's not a good look. They're not going to think of you as a reliable person that they want to promote. They're not going to think of you as someone that they want on their team in the future if they get promoted. There's a lot of ways that this can show up, right? So procrastination can also show up as not giving your best work when it comes to maybe you're a speaker and a speaking opportunity comes up. Maybe you could have had handouts or something that you could have given, but you didn't because you procrastinated. Now all you had was the time to just do your speech and that's it, right? So there's a lot of ways that this can show up. Maybe clients aren't satisfied. Maybe it can lead to decreased sales. I'm going to keep harping on these things because these are negative ways that it could show up in your business, right? Another way is burnout. It can show up as burnout. Striving for perfection in every task can be exhausting and lead to burnout. The constant pressure to perform at the highest level without accepting that mistakes and imperfections are part of the process and growth actually affect your mental and physical well-being in 100 ways. A deep burnout is very severe and it's a very dangerous thing, guys. It can lead to not only days of needing to pause, it can lead to weeks, months, or even years, or possibly even a year, I think. A year, maybe years, I don't know. But at least a year to recover from it, right? Where you can be you were so deeply burned out that you needed a whole year to recover from this. This actually happened to me a few years ago. Not a full year, but I did need about a month to recover. I was so burnt out and just in such a bad place that it started affecting me mentally, emotionally. I feel like I started dealing with a lot of anxiety, a little bit of depression, and it was very hard on me, right? If you actually want to go, I do a deep dive in that in episode 33. So if you go back on the podcast, episode 33, you'll hear my story of burnout, why it's dangerous, and how to combat it, the things you can do to combat getting to a place of burnout. And if you're in a place of burnout, remember to be careful with yourself, be gentle with yourself, right? Because it's a very tricky place. A very visible example of burnout is Vanessa Lau. If you're big on YouTube, she's a huge YouTuber. So if you like the business space, business development, she's huge on that stuff. She's a big YouTuber that had $1 million business. She had major signature courses. She just blew up over the last maybe 6 years on YouTube. And I remember I was really shocked when about a year and a half ago, she said she was going to pause. She was going to burn the whole thing down. I remember I got an email from her and she was saying that she was closing up her courses. She was refunding money from everyone that was in her courses that was, kind of evergreen courses. And she was just going on a sabbatical. And she was going to pause on YouTube. She wasn't going to do anything. She was basically blowing up her $1 million business because she was burnt out, right? At the time, we didn't know if she was going to come back. We didn't know how she was doing. We just knew that she was in a very unhealthy place mentally, right? And so this is the danger of burnout, right? Where you're in such a bad place mentally and emotionally that you just cannot go any further, right? That you end up hating your $1 million business. She had a $1 million business that she completely burned to the ground because she was miserable, right? Thankfully, she took I think over a year off. She came back. She has a bubble tea business that she's launching with her husband. She's back, or her boyfriend. She's back on YouTube. She's doing her thing. She is great. Actually, I love her. I think she comes up with great content and I'm so happy she's back on YouTube. But that's just an example of what happens with severe burnout, and it's very dangerous. Like I said, it can lead to a lot of anxiety, it can lead to depression or worse. So you really want to measure yourself when it comes to burnout. You don't want to get to that place. And obviously, how does it affect your career business? Obviously, if you are in a very bad place of burnout, it's going to make you stop. So if you have goals for the next 2 years, 3 years, and 5 years, if you have to take a whole year off of your business, a whole year off from your career or from whatever professional side hustle, whatever you have going on, that's going to set you back, right? And that's not what you want, obviously, right? So you want to avoid getting to a place of burnout. So that is another effect of perfectionism. So number 3 is stifled creativity. Perfectionism can inhibit creativity because it tends to encourage rigid thinking. When someone is too focused on doing things perfectly, they may avoid experimenting or trying new approaches that could lead to innovation. Guys, this is huge, right? This is where you start getting stagnant in your job and in the systems you've created in your business. You start not thinking outside the box, right? You start, you don't come up with brilliant ideas anymore. You're not creative. If you're a songwriter, you cannot come up with a song to save your life. If you can't write a book like this. You can't do your best work. You can't be creative. You can't use your genius if you are stifled with creativity, right? Because we are all creative in our own ways. Even an accountant is creative. We're all creative in our own ways, right? And if you are so overwhelmed with perfectionism, you are stifled with creativity, you really can't do your brilliant work. You can't do your best work anymore. You can't be innovative, right? Maybe how it affects you is that you stop attracting clients. Your sales start to decline because you're doing the same thing after the same thing week after week after week, right? And you're not getting outside of that rigid box, right? Maybe you have a strategy for social media growth and you're doing the same thing every single week and you're not trying out new things. You're not trying being innovative anymore because you are just stagnant with creativity because you are with this perfectionism mindset. You thought like, oh, this social media strategy worked. I'm going to do this forever. And no, the times are changing. You got to get with the times, right? It's so important to be flexible, because what happens when you're not flexible and you're not innovative is that you get left behind, guys. I've seen this with so many businesses that were great 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 2 years ago, and they're still doing the same thing. Or people in the YouTube space or podcasters are still, you really got to evolve and change with the times, because if not, you get left behind. And that's the case with everything, right? So it's the same, like right now, get with the AI times, right? Get with the things that you got to get with. If not, like that's like kind of how the digital times were 10 years ago, right? And so we have to be constantly evolving and changing so we don't get left behind in our industry, so we don't get left behind in our businesses. And if you are too rigid with your thinking because you are a perfectionist, you're going to get left behind. That's a danger. You're going to get left behind. You're not going to exceed or excel in your career and business. You're not going to be competitive anymore. People aren't going to want to hire you as much, or maybe your business is not going to be as thriving. You're not going to track the sales. You're not going to be cutting edge. You're not going to be attractive to new people, new clients, because you've been left behind because you were too rigid with your thinking. You were too much of a perfectionist. You stayed with something that worked and you just stayed there, right? So you end up feeling left behind. You lose your competitive edge, is what I wrote. And it can just affect you in so many ways. So guys, do not do this, right? Do not be left behind. Do not be stifled with your creativity because your mind is you're too rigid with your perfectionism and things have to be perfect. If you recover from perfectionism and don't deal with perfectionism, I can't say the word, you are going to be more agile. You're going to be more flexible. You're going to be able to try something new. It works, great. If it didn't work, okay, you evolve and you move on to the next thing. You got to stay adaptable and flexible. That's the way you survive in business, right? That's the way you survive in your career. That's the way you stay. That's how people succeed, right? And so it's really important that you address this issue with perfectionism, because it can really affect you in so many ways with your professional development, right? So that is number 3. Number 4 is difficulty with delegation. Perfectionists often struggle to delegate because they worry about others, that others won't meet their standards. This can lead to micromanagement, which can, harm a team morale and productivity. Guys, this is huge. I have dealt with micromanagers so many times in my life, and it is not easy to work with. And I think I've even been a micromanager at moments, right? And neither one is healthy, right? It's not a good thing. Micromanagers end up suffocating their team, so much so that they maybe end up losing assistants, losing team members to maybe other teams or other companies, other businesses, to the competition. Who knows, right? It's just, or maybe you end up hiring a VA or a team member and you spend hours training them, but because things aren't perfect, there's a little thing here and there, you take over that task again, and now you wasted money because now your virtual assistant or your assistant is not doing your work. They are essentially doing nothing because you took over their workload. You're doing your workload and their workload. I've had bosses like this before, and you end up losing money and you end up losing time and energy. And this is crucial. You need your energy, you need your focus, you need your time, you need this if you're going to evolve and move forward with your business and your career and your professional life, right? Maybe you get sucked into day-to-day operations and you stop being the CEO of your company. You stop being the VP of the division that you're in because you're sucked up in the little day-to-day activities of the people on your team, right? Maybe that can really hinder you in a lot of ways because now you are not open and available because you're doing the day-to-day stuff. You're not open and available to see the opportunities that are around you and that are arising in front of you. And maybe there was an opportunity, or there could be an opportunity for professional growth with maybe a boss needs you to, or there's a project that's coming up and you could have tackled that project if you weren't involved in this. And maybe that could have given you visibility with the higher ups in your company, that could have given you favor with your boss. They would have thought about you for promotion in the future. There's a lot of ways you can miss opportunities if you are stuck in the day-to-day stuff. As a CEO or a business owner, if you are stuck in the day-to-day mundane, the little emails, all those little things, then how are you going to do the big picture stuff for your company? How are you going to drive it forward, right? Of course, this is once you have the money and you have evolved enough where you have a team. Maybe you're a one person show or one person act, right? Where you are managing, wearing all the hats in your business because you're still a baby business. That's okay too, right? There's no problem with that. But I'm just saying, when the seasons evolve, you got to get with the times, you got to change, and you got to start delegating. So if you have difficulty delegating because of your perfectionism, this is really going to stifle you in a lot of ways. You're going to miss out on opportunities for visibility. You are going to miss out on, opportunities to rise in your industry, to, be in publications. There's so many ways that it could show up, right? Because you are so stuck in the day-to-day, you're missing out on opportunities, right? You're wasting opportunities, and it could really affect you where maybe you start seeing a sales decline because you're not doing the stuff to get the sales, get new clients, right? You're just doing the same old things, and now because you're not delegating stuff, right? So it can affect you in so many ways, guys. And another one is impaired decision making. Perfectionists tend to overanalyze situations, seeking the perfect solution. This can delay decision making and lead to missed opportunities, as they may spend too much time looking for ideal scenario that may not exist. Guys, this is huge, right? So basically, you are so stuck looking for something to look like X, like this box, right? It has to look exactly like this, or you're not going to say yes. You're not going to approve the project for your team. You're not going to move forward. You start affecting the time of your team members. You start affecting your time because you cannot come up with a solution to this problem because it has to look like a certain scenario. It doesn't look ideal. It doesn't look the way you thought. You can't think outside the box because it has to be perfect. It really impairs your decision making. It could also look like missed opportunities with your business or career, right? Maybe you don't send the email, you don't get that big guest because you are, harping on yourself or want things to look a certain way, right? Or maybe you miss an opportunity for a career or for a job. Like maybe you see an opportunity come up in a company that you love, but maybe you feel like your resume it's not the moment, it's not the time. You harp too much and you don't make the decision, you don't move, right? So inaction is actually a decision, right? So if you're in between yes and no and you don't make a decision, you're basically saying no, right? So it's lack of making a decision is also a decision, right? So it's something that you end up looking back and seeing missed opportunities after the fact. And sometimes you might beat yourself up because of one of those opportunities could have changed your life, right? So there are a lot of missed opportunities that could come up when you are not making the decisions quickly, right? You don't see them, you don't seize the moment, you don't close the deal, you don't get that sale because things were not the ideal the way you wanted to. You didn't feel like you needed to talk to that client in that moment. You didn't feel like it was the right moment. You just missed the opportunity, right? And so impaired decision making can affect you in a lot of ways. You don't make the decision because you imagined that there would be another way. You end up slowing down everyone around you, right? You end up slowing down yourself mostly in progress, right? So you are slowing down your own progress by being impaired with your decision making because of your perfectionism, right? And it's affecting your career, it's affecting your business and your professional life. And you are not where you want to be professionally because you keep struggling with this. You keep going back to this impaired decision making, which is part of perfectionism. So you really got to heal this perfectionism, right? So that is number 5. Number 6 is impaired relationships with colleagues. Guys, this is a big one, right? Perfectionists can create friction with coworkers or team members because they just have high expectations, right? They're really high expectations of themselves and others. They can be really critical, frustrated, or disappointed when things don't meet their standards. This can lead to a lot of tension, miscommunication, even resentment within teams. I've seen it happen so many times where someone just overreacts to a situation or doesn't know how to communicate properly because of their emotions, because they're a perfectionist and they needed things a certain way and it didn't pan out that way. And now they're blowing up at people. Now they're being very difficult to work with. They're not communicative. There's so many ways that this could go, but how does this affect your business or your career? Well, if you are the colleague that's difficult to work with, when your colleagues, this happens all the time, they will get promoted, they will go to different companies, they'll have different opportunities in front of them. They're not going to think of you. They're not going to go back to you and be like, oh, I know this girl that would be amazing for this opportunity. Let me give her a call. They're not going to do that, right? Because you have made yourself a difficult person to work with, right? So they're not going to think of you for future opportunities. So it could really hinder your future growth and professional development in that way. For business, right? If you are someone that is, difficult to deal with, you're not going to get that many clients. You're not going to get that many, sales. Like, it's not going to be what you want it to be. If you are so stuck on like the high expectations for your team members too, if you have employees and you are just so difficult to work with, you're going to lose team members. Same as, it's not easy to work with someone that has a lot of friction, that is a perfectionist, that has a very high standard, that is constantly frustrated because maybe you didn't meet their standards. It can be crippling, right? So this is something that can really affect you. You can probably hire a great hire and train them and love them, and then they leave because you are so difficult to work with, right? So these are not things that you want for your business. These are not things that you want for your career or your professional development. They can really hinder you in a lot of ways. Another one is fear of feedback. So, right, we talked about this a little bit a few weeks ago. Perfectionists can be overly sensitive to feedback, seeing it as a personal failure rather than a tool for growth. This fear of criticism can actually cause them to shy away from seeking constructive feedback, even with engaging healthy discussions about improvements that can hinder their career development. So, how does this look like? So, if you are so defensive and so strong-willed and just don't want to hear it, or so embarrassed and don't want to hear when any constructive criticism from anyone, it's going to slow your growth, right? Because if you can kind of deal with that perfectionism and be like, hey, to a friend or someone that you respect or someone that you trust and say, hey, what did I do wrong? What would you advise? That's going to open you up probably to a lot of progress. And I'm preaching to myself here because I am not great with opening myself up to asking for help or asking for feedback or constructive criticism, which is actually something that can propel you forward in your career, your business, or your professional development, right? So it's really crucial that you tackle that perfectionism, right? That you get over that fear of feedback. I went into that a few weeks ago, right? Where if someone that is very dealing with perfectionism, they are very defensive when people want to give them feedback, when people want to just give them like advice or constructive criticism, they tend to be very defensive and defend themselves and really close themselves off, right? They put up a wall. So that is not something that we want to be, right? Because that's actually going to hinder us. It's going to keep us stagnant. It's going to keep us from growing and becoming who we want to become. So it's definitely something that can hinder you in so many ways professionally with your professional development. So there you have it. Overall, all these things can lead to a lack of productivity, which this is not good for your business. It's not good for your career or your professional life. So there you have it. Those are 7 ways that perfectionism can hinder your business, career, and professional growth. I hope you got a lot of value out of this, and I hope to see you next time.